Hey gang, so here we are, a couple days removed from the Lots of Ship Talk SCL, and on the, let's see, this is the Best in Show day at IAE, so it's a good time to go into what was said. A quick thing before I get into it, there was a ton of detailed information, and this is a summary video, so I am going to be glossing over things, just beating the comments to the punch. Consider this like the cliff notes for the longer show. Right off the bat, Jared loves pumpkin pie more than the community. If it were apple pie or apple crisp, I'd be right there with him. But pumpkin, anyway, since Jared's over in the UK, the crew went to Costco, so Pacific Northwest represent, and got him an American Thanksgiving, which was pumpkin pie, red vines, and Reese's peanut butter cups. So, well played, UK team. On to the ship stuff. Starting off, these are the big wigs of all things ships. So John Crew, who controls the whole ship shebang. Ben Curtis, who's the visual art director, makes sure the ships stay on a visual target from concept to completion. And Mark Gibson, who's the lead vehicle content designer, who handles most of the gameplay and technical aspects of the vehicle design. Bacon and eggs or beans and toast? Obviously, there's bacon and eggs in the wrong answer. Jared mixed things up a bit, but the show largely started with him asking high-level questions. Jared gets some heat during these shows sometimes, but I don't feel it's really well-deserved. He does have a pretty good sense of the concerns of the community, by and large. Anyways, first question up. This year, they've released 27 ships, and Jared asked them how and why. John said they knew they were going to be setting that pace before the year started, so the vehicle teams were able to gear up and plan beforehand. Ben mentioned they've been expanding the vehicle teams over the last couple years. Those people getting caught up with the process and CIG changing some of their internal processes has allowed them to pick up the pace of ship development and allowed them to make all the ships this year straight to flyable without a single concept sale. Of the 27 ships that they released, how many were from the backlog? And I was glad to hear the answer largely echoed what I say often in my Ships of the Backlog series. The ships that are still in the backlog don't have their gameplay or mechanics in the game yet. John led off with that answer here. Certain backlog ships just don't have the gameplay in the game, or it won't be developed during the time that the ship is in development, usually about 18 months, particularly for the big ships, but that was on the previous kind of production line. Jared mentioned engineering dropping very shortly, planned for the end of the year, and the vehicle team is also on the hook for going back through all the existing ships and making sure that those ships are compatible with this new coming mechanic. So close to 200 ships now. Mark mentioned that the vehicle team is also heavily involved in testing this. So they're not just carving out space for components and kicking it to the next team, they are the next team. He also brought up the good point that how ships are made has changed a lot over the years. So a ship that was made and released, say, 7 or 8 years ago is going to be completely different to break down and implement something like engineering than some ship that was released this year, for example. And part of that is knowing the feature or mechanic is coming and knowing exactly how it'll work. And these are two different things. So it's literally building the plane while you're flying it. Game design. Armor was next up, and engineering. There's an ISC vid coming next week, apparently. They'll go into a lot more detail on both armor and engineering. But as I said in this vid, where there's a link in the upper right there, engineering and armor will absolutely change the meta and the current balance in this game. It'll likely end the light fighter meta, for example. Then Jared asked about updating existing but older ships, and they fell into three categories: gold standard, rework, and Mark IIs. Ben took this one. Gold standard has all the modern features and functionality. So physicalized components, correct metrics, working buttons, modern MFDs, that sort of thing. The shape of the ship, the actual mesh, is more or less fine. It's just lacking the features and mechanics that needs to function in the current or near future game environment. Of course, there can be minor tweaks to how a ship works, particularly if it's a much older ship, but largely how it looks is less of a concern for Gold Standard than how it functions. Next question was what happens with the decision between a rework or going for a Mark II? Mark took this one and explained that the choice depends on what they're trying to achieve and whether the existing vision matches the modern vision. Using the 600i as an example, they realized the interior in practice, once they had built it out, made no sense for what they wanted the ship to do or how its capabilities were going to be. In that case, it basically has to be taken back to almost a white box state and rethought. That is a rework. Mark II's, on the other hand, the concept of the ship, the design, the layout, the idea, the vision of the ship as it exists in the game is fine. They just want to make it bigger and better or bring it more in line with the modern style guide. And then he confirmed the Aurora is getting a Gold Standard and a Mark II version in 2026. So one to make the old ship functional in the modern game, and a new one that creates an Aurora the modern RSI style guide coexists with, and both will exist in the game at the same time, a lot like the Hornet series. Next up, cargo capacities, and this is where I'm noticing a lot of other content creators are screaming nerf. First up, hull series, which were concepted, let's see, 10 years ago, maybe a bit more than 10 years ago, when cargo was measured in freight units, FUs, and were more just kind of a general, sure, that sounds good number, rather than something tied to an actual physicalized gameplay loop. Needless to say, now that they're building these ships out and they have to be physicalized, things are a-changing. The whole C stayed close to what it originally was. The whole A got an extra 16 SCU, so it would better match with the cargo box size. John said that 32 SCU containers will be the largest containers the game will have, and that set the metrics for later cargo movers and also how they're kind of balancing out what ships and how much ships will carry. The whole B is jumping from 384 SCU to 512 SCU. So yeah, all those things I've been saying about the whole B being kind of a king medium cargo mover, huge bump, and it confirmed it can still land with the arms extended, although it's going from a plus shape with the arms to an X shape. So they're kind of turning them 45 degrees so it can still land while all the cargo's on it. Bad news, but again, we're talking about a 10-year-old concept here. The whole D is shrinking to 6,912 SCU, which is still a really girthy D if we're being honest. Ask your mom. And the whole E is going down to 12,288 SCU. I'm seeing other content creators howling about this, but could you imagine unloading the original numbers? It would be a week-long process for an org, or just moving crates and playing Tetris. No, thank you. And it's still a ridiculous amount of cargo. And the decision was made to lessen the impact on the overall economy, which is something that the community has been wondering for years. A single whole E would have crashed the economy of Nyx, for example. John mentioned he couldn't think of a single ship in concept right now that beats even the whole C in carrying capacity, much less the larger hulls, the D and the E. The original numbers just, honestly, they never made sense. So this isn't really a nerf. It's just them applying a realistic metric with the actual gameplay in mind. Then they jumped to the railing, and John and Ben admitted that they're still chewing on the weird triangular cargo pods. But yeah, the cargo capacity went from 320 to 640 SEUs, so it doubled. For the triangles, Ben was saying he'll try to keep them as a visual element, but they'll probably end up as something of a lattice that holds the cargo in place, or as end cap on pods. But the standard human containers, the rectangles, will be the guiding metric as opposed to introducing a whole new cargo container just for the Raylan and the Xi'an. The Ironclad, both of them, are also jumping up in cargo capacity thanks to them literally just moving a couple of ladders in the cargo bay. 2,204 for the base model and 1,440 for the assault. So not bad. Those things will be able to move a lot of cargo. Then they switch gears and ask about the 2 remaining silhouettes from last year's SitCon. And John actually said that it turns out there were 3 and the community missed one. And it turns out that my guesses were largely correct. We didn't get these ships because they were related to crafting and building, and CIG put crafting and building on pause in 2025. The one we thought was the MTC was actually the MSC, which is a crafting variant of the MDC. It opens up the back and has a crafting station. The Atlas chassis ground vehicle is called the Auxiliar, or at least right now it is, which has a tier 2 medbed and a crafting center built into it. So it's kind of like the Clipper, but on wheels. And the last one, the weird one I thought might be a boat, is a consolidated Outlands ship called, at least for now, the Forge. And you can probably guess what a ship being called the Forge would be doing. Crafting and refinery and ground extractor. So yeah, the Forge will sell like hotcakes, I'm guessing. They specifically didn't confirm if crafting and thus these 3 ships would be coming in 2026, since I think that decision would be coming down from a different team. So start holding your breath. Personally, I think engineering will take most of next year to sort out and get working properly. So maybe don't hold your breath too long. Then we got into questions from community and chat. Like them, I'll be doing these rapid fire. Perseus. Are they going to add gravity plates to the catwalk around the bridge on the Perseus? Their answer? No, for a variety of reasons, but mostly because it would be buggy and break things. Also, I was this show years old when I found out that there was a catwalk around the bridge of the Perseus. I had to load it up in my hangar and check it out. Sure enough, it's there. Why does the Perseus pilot control the torps, but the Polaris pilot can't? They actually will be putting in a bridge station to control the torps in 4.5, but it does come with downsides. No 360 view. It shoots less torpedoes at once, but not the pilot. They say for enforced balance reasons. Then they brought up the fact that the Idris pilot can fire the main gun of the Idris. And John said that's because of it being a fixed weapon attached to the front of the ship. It just makes sense that the person controlling the movement of the ship would have the best sense of when to pull the trigger on a fixed gun. And having a pilot communicate with the gunner would mean you'd never be hitting things with the main gun on the Idris. Signage in the Polaris. Ben made an artistic decision because he wanted the interior of the Polaris to be colder and more brutalistic. Now they've done it on the Perseus, and Ben said that they might go in and add it back into the Polaris, but he wants to test it out and sort of see how it looks and see how it works before they add it in game. So it's a maybe. Shark mouth Perseus skin. Maybe was their answer. Tell you what, shark mouth Perseus skin or we riot. I need my shark mouth CIG. More Star Kitten skins. Ben doesn't hate Star Kitten, despite rumors to the contrary, but if they put it in the game, he wants it to be released for a reason. Something like Star Kitten Celebration Month, that sort of thing. Something in the verse, in lore, that's tangible, not do it just to do it. How will ammunition on the Perseus be changed during combat? So not rearming in a hangar, for example. Short term, you'll be able to reload from a local cargo grid into a ship's stores. That's stores as in capacity on the ship, not as in shops. Just clarifying that point. That's for ships that are in another ship or docked to your ship. So a Gladius landed on an Idris, for example, when you rearm it, if you just have ammunition or missiles on the cargo grid in the landing bay on the Idris, it'll just hoover that out and put it on the ship. Long term, as far as like turrets go, they have space carved out next to the turrets for a future mechanic that will make it more manual and physicalized. The RSI salvation was up next, and they had a couple questions on that. The auto button at the back that'll allow it to just keep pooping out boxes. John said if you push the auto eject button in the cockpit, it should just keep spewing them out. But it sounded, listening to Ben and Mark, it sounds like there's a bug that they're working on regarding that one. So it might not be working for you at the time of this vid. Will the salvation fit and work with the Galaxy's refining module? And yeah, if it fits in the landing area, you can pull the boxes and refine it. So yes. And finally on the salvation, why aren't the salvation salvaging modules, little beams, swappable from cinches? And Mark said it was because it's a starter, so they wanted it to be as simple as possible. Bigger ships had more complexity. They did say for balance reasons, if the cinches just aren't working as far as how they envision the balance, they'll switch them out for the other heads so it makes a little more sense if they look at their metrics and they don't like it. Drake Clipper, which I had long referred to as the Drake Snail, was up next. What can it craft? John pointed out that was beyond what the ship team worked on, but he said small FPS and ship items, so basic stuff is expected. Why does it only have 2 size 1 shields? And that was a balance decision mostly. Also, the bonus is with the size 1 components that using that crafting bench, you'll actually be able to craft those size 1 components for it and get it working again. Something I hadn't considered, but it actually makes a lot of sense. And they said, why isn't it faster? Again, it's a balance thing, but it's also very efficient with its engines, which I can confirm. Last night for Friday Fly Day, after jumping across Stanton and then jumping across Pyro to go to Gaslight, and then going most of the way across Pyro to Pyro 1, I still had enough fuel to make a short jump to Checkmate. So yeah, it's a pretty efficient ship fuel-wise. Jared shouted out the ship animation and sound design teams at this point, and yeah, both are really, really getting amazing in the game. Anyone that's flown the Wolf or Clipper can tell you that. Speaking of the Wolf, will the Wolf weapon kits be available in-game? Yes. Jared broke off on a very good, very enlightening short tangent here, stating all of these ships and the weapon kits would be available in-game, but might not necessarily be available for in-game money. That's kind of cool because it confirms that things may be locked behind reputation or mission gates or things like Wicklow, thus giving you a reason to engage with the game in the game loops rather than just the in-game stores. Then they moved on to general ship questions. The Clipper introduced the generalist ship category, and they were wondering if there would be any more. And they said, yeah, one's coming in 2026. Also, Jared and John are going to hopefully finally fix the ship matrix on the RSI site this year. Probably. Maybe. And more video content in 2026? Yeah, but not as much as the previous years. Something of a middle ground between the previous years and 2025, but Jared wants to get more vids out in 2026. The Caterpillar and Ironclad command modules, people were wondering if there's progress, and they said, yep, a prototype on the total ship control from the module, so being able to control the Caterpillar from a module that can pop off, or control the Ironclad from a module that can pop up. They're saying it's working, and it's on track to release with the Ironclads. The community had a question on why no downward-facing landing lights, and this one actually had kind of a cool, sneaky answer. They're trying to balance out the community need to be able to see what's in front of the ship with being able to see in the darkness, and they were saying that really, really, really bright headlights weren't working the way they intended, and it was hard to get them to balance in the game. So instead, they're going to shift to the same kind of night vision we have on some of the scopes, and they're calling it lamp. So there you go. Lamp. Soon. Will crafting stations be added to other ships now that the Clipper got one? And John was saying yes to the Carrack. They're not sure about the Aquila because they don't think the original concept had one. And that said, they're going to have that transportable crafter, the one that they showed that you kind of cart around. So I think any ship that has something like an 8 SCU grid will be able to have a crafter just by putting that in the cargo bay. So, can we reserve names for our big ships again? And this was kind of a long winded question, but it had sort of an interesting answer. Mechanical wise, with all the serial numbers, the ships are set up to have names right now. However, there's obvious issues on the implementation side. How to break up the waves, keeping an eye out for the egregiously obscene names, as well as artistically getting the lettering to work on the various ships. At the end of the day, it sounds like there's some significant challenges that they'll have to tackle someday, but it's probably not a priority right now, and certainly not in 2026 from the sound of it. Battlecruiser. Concept sale is coming in Invictus of next year. Obviously won't be straight to flyable, since this thing is probably larger than a Javelin. And kind of the final question of this section was, will Star Citizen ever have enough ships? No, simply put, they haven't even filled out the complete pantheon for a single manufacturer game loop. So they're years away from even that, much less running out of ideas for like the alien ships, which will also have several manufacturers and game loops. This section came with the caveat that this group that they were talking to was the vehicle content folks. So grain of salt and limited info, in other words. Docking versus landing for ships with both options, splitting it out on the request. And yeah, they're going to do it, but there's a bug right now and they're working on fixing it first, but sooner than later. AI blades, they're still the plan, they're still coming, not yet. And I have a few vids that talk about the limitations of those things, so check that vid if you're curious. Yes, they will allow for solo play, but there will be associated limitations, and you will always be able to do more with friends, allies, and companions. Straight from Jared's mouth. Scalable payouts for the larger ships like the Perseus and the Polaris, etc. Yeah. Mission 2.0, which they've been mentioning in all the monthly reports, will be a sea change in the way missions will be able to scale, balance, and pay out. Which that last will include items on top of actual spacebucks. So you might get gear or components or blueprints, for example. Jared was saying that patches will be a hair slower to come out in 2026, so they're going to slow down the cadence a little bit, but they should have more content in them. So read more game loops, that sort of stuff. More normal SCLs and ISCs in 2026, and this one was a reiteration from earlier, and yes from Jared. Maybe not the previous 1 to 5 a week that they used to do, but more than in 2025 where it was like 1 a month, if that. When is the Polaris and Idris coming to in-game shops? Again, he kind of answered this one earlier, but he went into more detail here. Jared reiterated that not every ship will be available in the in-game shops, but they will be available in-game. So read, that means as a reward for missions, crafting, reputation, and so on. General quarters alarm on larger ships. Yep, it's committed, it's coming. No solid when, though. Will ballistic weapons still have different kinds of ammunition? It's still the plan. They just haven't implemented it yet. Will turrets ever actually be decent? And they said, yeah, they've been tweaking them over time, but they're not where they want them just yet, obviously. So they understand they aren't where they should be, but they have an idea of where to take them. And then, of course, we always got this one where just fix the game first. This is the one that always comes up in these shows. But Jared pointed out that there's nearly 1,000 employees at CIG, and they all have different specialties. In other words, you don't want the person that makes the coffee fixing the car. Different people work on different stuff. Different people address different problems. Enough said. Next year's ships. Yeah, this gets interesting. Will be the source of speculation for the next couple months. And the next couple months will be relatively quiet as CIG goes on break and then comes back for their planning sessions. So they confirmed an Aurora Gold Standard and an Aurora Mark II are coming. So we're going to get both. The Raelin is coming. Drake Command Module, so that's the Ironclads, and maybe a soft reboot on the Caterpillar, maybe, are coming. Then Jared realized that revealing the entire ship-by-ship lineup was probably not a fantastic career move, so he switched it up and just went with, okay, so which manufacturers will be releasing ships? And this was that list. Drake, RSI, Aegis, Anvil, Misk, Kruger has another one coming, Grays, Origin finally comes back on the field. That's kind of cool. Gatak and Greycat. Other manufacturers are being worked on, but they're not on the release schedule. So we're not getting them in 2026, or they're not planned to be released in 2026, but they'll be worked on in 2026. So that would probably be something like the Banu Merchantman. Think ships like that they're planning on working on, but are clearly not coming in 2026. So let me do a quick series of guesses here just based on that lineup of manufacturers. Drake's at least is the Ironclads. RSI is the Galaxy, and they did confirm that that will be the big ship of IAE next year, along with the Auroras, both the update, the Gold Standard, and the Mark II. Aegis, man, I was going to say the battle cruiser, but they did say release. So there's probably something else coming from Aegis. Well, there has to be something else coming from Aegis. The thing is, Aegis produces everything, and they're kind of weird. It'll definitely be military, though. You could guess that. Anvil is likely the auxiliar down that Alice chassis. Misk, man, that one's hard to say. Likely the Starlancer BLD, if they're going to push building this year, but I wouldn't be surprised if they snuck something else in there, like a Freelancer Mark II or something like that. Kruger has the Stingray, which they mentioned near the end of the show, which sure sounds like a medium to heavy stealth fighter, maybe. Grays, that one's probably the Hornet Buck mashup that we know is out there that exists in Squadron 42. Origin, not sure. I don't think this would be the 600i rework. It's hard to think of a size missing in their lineup right now, so maybe something between the 400 and 600. Gatak is almost certainly the Raelin, but I wouldn't be shocked if there's a medium Gatak ship in the mix. Something between the Sulin and the Raelin. Remember, the Raelin is roughly the size of the Starfare. So there's a lot of ships that could fit in that mix. Greycat, that one is probably the MSC Crafter that they were talking about. The one that just pops open. So it sounds like they're probably on target to get crafting out in the next few months. But they also said that next year's schedule is about as aggressive as this year's. So there's a lot of room for multiple ships from each manufacturer. So hold on to your butts. It should be an interesting year. Merchantman, catch you next time.